Jack Harmon stood on the porch of his ranch house, eyes locked on the wall of snow rolling down from the western mountain ridge. At 63, he'd lived through enough Colorado winters to know when a storm was serious. And this one had teeth. Hi everyone. Welcome to Real Life Stories Unveiled. Let's get started. The latest forecast had just come in. The worst blizzard in over 2 decades, expected to last at least 3 days, with winds gusting over 70 miles per hour. But Jack didn't need a weather alert to know that. He'd been reading the sky all morning. And those clouds weren't bluffing. A familiar pickup rolled into the driveway. Mike, his longtime ranch hand, had just finished moving the northern herd into the lower pasture. "You think this storm's really going to hit that hard?" Mike asked as he stepped out, his breath turning white in the bitter air. "Worse," Jack replied, still watching the horizon. "You better get home to your wife and kids. This place is about to be locked down." As the truck disappeared into the first flurries, Jack turned toward another part of the ranch that had weathered as many winters as he had. The rail line. 10 kilometers of steel track ran straight through his land, connecting with a long-forgotten switch onto the mountain main line. People called it outdated, pointless. But Jack never tore it up. His great-grandfather had laid that track back in the 1920s to move ore from their family's mine down to town. Most people had scrapped theirs decades ago. Jack? He kept it running, not for nostalgia, but because he knew one day it might matter. Then the radio crackled again. A passenger train bound from Phoenix to Denver had stalled near Back Ridge Pass. A freak icefall had damaged the engine. The train was dead on the line, 198. Passengers stuck mid-mountain. Sub-zero wind, no power, no heat, no help on the way. No one was talking about Jack Harmon's rail spur. Not in the news. Not in the emergency briefings. But Jack already knew what he had to do. If anyone could reach that train before darkness fell, it'd be him. And the engine he'd kept alive for 3 decades. Jack ran a final inspection along the tracks using his snowcat, an old tracked utility vehicle built for deep snow. It was slow, noisy, and a pain to maneuver, but it had never failed him in a storm. Snow was already building up on the rails, but thanks to his fall maintenance, they were still passable. He reached the switch yard where his private spur connected to the mountain main line. The wind was brutal here. Ice was already forming on the switch lever. He cleared it by hand, just as he'd done 100 times before. But this time, something felt different. His satellite phone buzzed. Unknown number. "This is Frank Whitman, Deputy Director of Operations at Western Mountain Rail," the voice said sharply. "I'm told you have a private line connecting to the ridge." "That's right," Jack said. 10 kilometers of track maintained. I've got a diesel locomotive and 2 converted freight cars ready. I can reach the train." "Mr. Harmon, we appreciate your concern," Whitman said, with the tone of someone used to saying no. "But we have a formal rescue protocol in place. Specialized crews are already being dispatched from the south." "And they won't get there before nightfall," Jack interrupted. "We're talking about sub-zero temperatures and nearly 200 people with no power. Every hour matters." "Jack," Whitman snapped, dropping the formal tone, "we're dealing with liability, safety regulations. This isn't as simple as showing up with an old train." Jack didn't argue. He just hung up. He turned the snowcat around and headed back toward the ranch, snow swirling like ghosts in his headlights. If they weren't going to let him help, he'd do it anyway. Back at the shop, Jack began pulling gear together. Blankets, first aid kits, food, heat packs, a portable fuel pump. He was mid-loading when the door to his shed slammed open and a familiar voice called out. Sheriff Tom Reeves stepped inside, dusting snow off his jacket. "Rail company's on to you," the sheriff said. "They want you to stand down. Legal threats, liability, all the usual." "They can say what they want," Jack replied, strapping a portable heater to a sled. "That train's still out there. I've been on calls with the governor's office, emergency response, even the Department of Transportation," Tom continued. "They're all dodging responsibility. No one wants to sign off on anything." Jack looked up from his tools. "You here to stop me?" Tom glanced around at the packed sleds and tools. "Looks like you're already moving." "I am." "Then I was never here," Tom said, after a long pause. "You do what you have to do. Sometimes asking forgiveness beats waiting for permission." An hour later, Jack's old 1950s diesel roared to life inside the shed. He had restored every bolt and bearing with his own hands. It wasn't certified, modern, or pretty, but it worked. The engine rolled out of the barn and onto his private track, pulling 2 freight cars behind it. One converted into an emergency shelter with the wood stoves and benches, the other packed with gear. At the rear, the old caboose doubled as a mobile workshop. Jack scanned the snowy horizon. No sign of the rail company yet. He pushed the throttle. The locomotive growled to life, steel wheels crunching over snow-covered rails as he headed toward the junction. He knew they'd try to stop him, but they'd have to catch him first. The closer Jack got to the junction, the heavier the wind became. Snow was now blasting sideways across the landscape, but the tracks held steady beneath the weight. Proof that every hour he'd spent maintaining them in the fall was worth it. Just 100 meters from the switch point, Jack slowed the train to a crawl. Through the swirl of snow, his headlamp caught something. A Western Mountain Rail service truck parked right across the junction. A man stood beside it, bundled in a company parka, arms waving frantically. Jack hit the brakes hard. Metal squealed under the strain as he brought the locomotive to a stop. He climbed down into the storm, pulling his coat tight as he trudged through the knee-deep snow toward the figure blocking his path. "Mr. Harmon, you need to stand down immediately," the man shouted over the wind. "I've got orders directly from HQ. You are not authorized to access this line." "People are freezing up there," Jack called back, voice sharp. "Your crews won't get there in time." "That's not your concern. This is Western Rail property, and you are in violation of federal transport regulations. If you proceed, the company will seize your equipment and press charges." Jack's eyes shifted to the switch just behind the man. It would take him less than a minute to throw it and connect to the Mountain Pass line. The company rep clearly realized it too. He stepped in front of the mechanism. "Don't even think about it, sir. I've been given authority to use any means necessary to stop unauthorized access." Jack paused, studying the young man's face. Early 30s, maybe. Likely a mid-level manager thrown into a situation way over his pay grade. "What's your name?" Jack asked. The man hesitated. James Peterson." "Well, James, let me ask you something. When you write your report later, are you ready to explain to the families of those people up there why you stopped the one guy who could have gotten to them?" Peterson's stance faltered. "That's not fair." "Oh. What's not fair," Jack cut in, stepping closer, "is letting people freeze to death while we argue about red tape. I'm not asking for permission, James. I'm going through that switch. You can help me, or you can watch me do it. Snow whipped around them. For a long second, neither man moved. Then Peterson sighed and stepped aside. I was never here, he muttered. Truck got stuck in a drift. By the time I got free, you were already gone. Jack nodded. Appreciate your honesty. He moved quickly to the switch and pulled the lever, connecting his private spur to the main line. Then, without another word, he climbed back into the cab of his locomotive. Peterson rolled down his window as the train began to move. Good luck, Mr. Harmon. They're going to need it. This was it, the point of no return. From this moment on, Jack Harmon was trespassing on a federally regulated rail line, operating unapproved equipment in a blizzard without clearance. But he didn't hesitate. He opened the throttle. The old diesel roared as it pushed forward into the storm. The steel wheels gripped the icy rails as Jack's locomotive entered the mountain pass. Visibility dropped to near zero. The wind howled like a beast in the canyon, rocking the train side to side as it pushed forward inch by inch. The trestle bridge came into view, or rather, its faint silhouette through the storm. The bridge curved across a deep gorge, a century-old structure built of steel and timber. Jack slowed the train to a crawl, every creak and groan of the bridge echoing through the frame as he guided the locomotive across. Beyond the bridge, the first tunnel loomed, a black hole cut into the rock. Inside, it was vault, dark and eerily quiet. The headlight from the engine cast shadows that danced across the stone walls. Jack checked his GPS. Just under 3 miles to go. Emerging from the tunnel, he saw it. A dim, flickering glow in the distance. The stranded passenger train. Its lights were weak. Some flickering, others dead. Snowdrifts had nearly swallowed the lower windows. The train looked like it had been entombed. Jack eased his locomotive to a stop, about 60 yards from the tail end of the stalled train, and grabbed his flashlight. He trudged through thigh-deep snow, the wind clawing at his coat, the cold biting into his bones. As he neared the train, he saw faces pressed against the windows, eyes wide, hands tapping the glass in disbelief. A conductor forced a door open, struggling against frozen hinges and blasting wind. "Who the hell are you?" he shouted over the storm. "Jack Harmon," he said, climbing aboard. "I've got a working locomotive and shelter cars on the other side of the pass. I'm here to get people out." The conductor blinked in disbelief. Rescue wasn't supposed to come till morning. Jack looked around the car. People bundled in coats and blankets, teeth chattering, some barely conscious. "Morning might be too late," he said. An elderly woman sat motionless near the wall, lips blue. A mother cradled a child wheezing through every breath. The train's emergency power was failing. No heat, no proper light, no medical supplies. "How many on board?" Jack asked. 198 passengers, 9 crew. Jack did the math in his head. "I can carry 40 people per trip. Prioritize children, elderly, and anyone needing medical help." The conductor hesitated. "The rail company hasn't authorized this." Jack cut him off with a look. "You really gonna wait for paperwork?" The conductor looked back at the freezing passengers and nodded. Within 20 minutes, they had identified the first group. The frailest, the sickest, the youngest. Some had to be carried. Others were barely able to walk. Jack, the conductor, and 2 crew members stomped down a snow path between the trains. A man carried his daughter, wrapped in coats and shaking. A teen held his grandmother by the arm, guiding her through the snow. When all 40 were aboard the shelter car, Jack lit the small stoves inside and handed out emergency blankets. It wasn't luxury, but it was warmth. It was life. "I'll be back for more," Jack told the conductor. "Keep the next group ready." Then he climbed back into the cab, shifted the engine into reverse, and began the slow journey out of the pass, with 40 souls depending on him. The return trip was slower, more cautious. Jack handled every turn like it was made of glass, because with 40 vulnerable passengers in tow, it might as well have been. When they reached the ranch, the place had transformed. Flashing red and blue lights cut through the white haze. Ambulances and county trucks waited along the siding. Sheriff Reeves stood nearby, waving the train in as medics rushed to unload the passengers. Some were carried out on stretchers, others wrapped in every blanket they had, their faces dazed but alive. "You weren't kidding," the sheriff said quietly, as Jack stepped down from the cab. "They didn't have time for kidding," Jack replied. He refueled the locomotive immediately. No rest, no hesitation. There were still over 100 people stuck up there. The second trip went faster. With a path already carved, and the crew knowing what to expect, Jack evacuated another 40 people. By the third run, word had spread. Emergency crews were coordinating transfers. Volunteers had started arriving with hot food. The high school gym had been turned into a full-blown shelter. But as the third group unloaded, Sheriff Reeves approached again, this time with a more serious look. "The railroad knows," he said. "CEO himself is on the warpath. They're threatening lawsuits, seizure orders, federal charges." Jack wiped his hands with a rag. "Let them file whatever they want. I've got one trip left." Then his satellite phone rang. "Unknown number," Jack answered. "Harmon." "This is Gregory Sullivan, CEO of Western Mountain Rail," the voice snapped. "You are operating unauthorized equipment on a federal line. You are in direct violation of multiple regulations. You left people to freeze while your lawyers pass the blame," Jack fired back. "Our rescue teams will arrive by morning." "Morning's too damn late," Jack interrupted. "I've already pulled 120 people out. I'm going back for the rest." "Stand down immediately," Sullivan ordered. "If you continue, we'll seize your train, revoke your land easement, and sue for damages." Jack looked out over the blizzard-streaked field. He could barely see the tracks anymore. "I'm going," he said. "You can throw every lawyer in your building at me, after I've saved everyone I can." He ended the call. The sheriff, who'd been standing quietly nearby, shook his head with a half-smile. "You know they're serious. So am I." Jack stepped back into the cab and gave the throttle one last pull. The engine roared, steam rising from the vents like a beast waking up. It wasn't just a train anymore. It was defiance on steel wheels. The fourth run was the worst yet. The wind had picked up so violently that snow no longer fell. It blasted sideways like sand. Visibility was nearly zero. Jack had to drive by feel, by memory, by faith. The old trestle bridge creaked and groaned under the weight of the overloaded train and screaming wind. Jack kept one hand on the throttle and one on the brake, nursing the locomotive forward inch by inch. When he reached the stranded train again, the situation had worsened. Power was completely out. Inside, it was darker and colder than ever. People were bundled together, silent, exhausted, and fading fast. He and the crew wasted no time. They moved through the cars quickly, helping people stand, carry bags, wrap babies tighter. Everyone who hadn't been taken yet was going now, crammed into every available inch of Jack's shelter car and caboose. No one stayed behind. The return trip began as the first light of dawn struggled to break through the blizzard. The train was heavier now, slower, groaning under the full weight of hope and humanity. Jack pushed it gently, patiently, like, like guiding a wounded animal back to safety. And when they cleared the mountain pass, for the last time he saw them, a line of rail trucks parked near his ranch, men in branded parkas, clipboards, suits. Western Mountain Rail had arrived. He brought the train to a halt near the waiting ambulances. One by one, the last of the passengers were helped off. A few stumbled. Some cried. A little girl turned and waved at Jack, still sitting in the cab, before being carried away in her father's arms. A man in an expensive overcoat approached the locomotive. His shoes weren't made for snow. "Mr. Harmon, Gregory Sullivan," he said, hand extended. Jack climbed down slowly, ignoring the handshake. "You put my company in a difficult position," Sullivan began. "What you did, while well-intentioned, has created massive liability exposure." Jack glanced toward the ridge. "Did your official rescue team ever make it through?" Sullivan hesitated. "They were delayed. Road closures. Then I guess what I did wasn't the problem." "That's not the point." "It's exactly the point," Jack snapped. "Everything else is just paperwork." 20 Sims 44. Sullivan paused. The fight in his shoulders softened slightly. "Actually, that's not why I'm here." Jack raised an eyebrow. "My sister and her 2 kids were on that train," Sullivan said quietly. "You saved them." Jack blinked. That he hadn't expected. "We'd like to talk about a formal agreement," Sullivan continued. "Not to buy your railroad, just to partner with you. In the future, during emergencies, we want this line to be an official alternative route." "You want to turn it into a tourist track?" Jack asked flatly. "No, a working emergency corridor with you in charge." 3 months later, crews installed new signals at the junction. Jack Harmon's line appeared on official Western Mountain Rail maps as an alternate mountain route, and Jack was listed as the local route specialist. The high school gym, now quiet again, still bore the thank you banners from the passengers he'd rescued. The sheriff stopped by one afternoon, leaning against his patrol car as he watched workers finish up track calibration. "Not bad for a guy they threatened to sue," he said. Jack chuckled. "Turns out, sometimes old things still work when the new ones fail." He looked out across his land, where the tracks disappeared into the tree line, just like they had for nearly a century. Some things weren't built for show. They were built to last. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so more people can hear stories like this one. Because sometimes it's not the newest tools that save lives. It's the ones that never stopped working. Thanks for watching Real Life Stories Unveiled. We'll see you next time.